Då tror jag att vi kan sätta igång det här seminariet om Seeing Red, Access to Comprehensive Sexuality Education in Narrow Democratic Spaces. Firstly, I will just speak in Swedish, introducing the empty chair that we'll do at all the seminars that are organized by Church of Sweden, before introducing the topic and the panelists, the eminent panelists that I have with me here up at the podium. När det gäller alla Svenska kyrkans seminarier här under Almedalen så har vi den tomma stolen här. Den ser ni tydligt, som då får representera alla de som på grund av olika hot, trakasserier eller stigmatisering i olika former inte kan delta i den här typen av seminarier i Sverige eller i världen, och som på olika sätt också får utstå många svåra konsekvenser av detta. Så det vill vi från Svenska kyrkan lyfta upp, att vi tänker på dessa människor som inte har samma möjligheter som vi att finnas med. Och det får den här tomma stolen symbolisera. Vi bärs ju som kyrka av idén om alla människors lika värde och att vi vill skapa ett öppet, inklusivt och demokratiskt samhälle tillsammans. Så den tomma stolen finns med oss när vi nu kommer att gå in och diskutera de här spännande frågorna som vi ska nu prata om. Seeing Red, and now I turn to English. Access to comprehensive sexuality education in narrow democratic spaces. I will just have a brief introduction to the topic before introducing the panelists, when we will dig deeper into the issue of comprehensive sexuality education and why that is important, and why that is important as well as for religious institutions. Sexuality education is a right embodied in international treaties and conventions, but it remains a highly contested area. And of course, youth suffer the consequences of that around the world. Access to comprehensive sexuality education is necessary to ensure that children and youth, a diverse group with many various needs, are fully empowered to participate in society. But today we know there's a lot of opposition from governments, from NGOs, from various faith-based actors as well, that are motivated by interpretations of religion, culture, or sort of a political cultural context. So the key issue and the key challenge, how can we ensure this access to SRHR, sexual and reproductive health and rights, and comprehensive sexuality education in this context? Where do we find the examples of good practice? As church, we know that faith leaders have powers. Often they are legitimate actors in their different contexts. And they do play a very important role because they're able to influence values, norms. And they have institutions that are powerful. We know that 84% of all persons in the world do adhere to a faith tradition, be it Christian, be it Muslim, be it Hindu, be it Buddhist. So the world is religious, and it means that it's not only an issue for faith-based actors to work on this issue of norms and values and attitudes in this area, but it's also a challenge to secular development organizations that we need to work together with this. Church of Sweden itself has a position on SRHR, including comprehensive sexuality education, and it's based on a firm theological grounding, and it's a rights-based position. And we do that because we are a church, not in spite of being church. Because we see that we as a church has a responsibility to work to make sure that all people live a full life in dignity, equality, and justice. And we see sexuality as an integral part of what it means to be human. And in our theological tradition, we appreciate that, and we wish to stand for a tradition that sees sexuality as something positive and not something that leads to ill health or to injustices or discrimination. So promoting gender justice and gender equality, we do that on the basis of our faith in Church of Sweden. But we know as well that we cannot do this on our own. So we link up to faith-based partners and alliances around the world. We're working together with NRELA, which is an international network of religious leaders living with HIV, which is a long-standing partner to Church of Sweden, and also to Save the Children. We're working together with our global ecumenical organizations like the World Council of Churches, the Lutheran World Federation, and the ACT Alliance, which is a coalition of more than 144 churches and church-related development organizations around the world. We know as well that we need to work in alliances with other actors, like the ones we have here, Save the Children, the RFSU here in Sweden, and many, many others, in order to bring this issue up on the political agenda about sexual and reproductive health and rights, comprehensive sexuality education, because of the rollback that we see in the world, and because of the fact that this issue is so polarized. But now we will focus on best practices. What do we know, and how can we ensure this access? And we have this eminent panelist with us up here, with me up here on the podium. First of all, Aksa Charles. You're a gender advisor with the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Tanzania, and you're most welcome. We have Lena Ingestam, Director of International Programs with Rädda Barnen, Save the Children here in Sweden. You also run a regional program on adolescent SRHR in Eastern and Southern Africa. You're also welcome. And then Hans Linde, the president of the RFSU, the Swedish Association for Sexuality Education in Sweden. This will be indeed an eminent panel, and that will... I'm looking very much forward to this conversation that we are going to have now. But we're going back to that first basic fundamental question. What is comprehensive sexuality education, and why is it so important? Hans Linde, you will explore that with us.
Well, thank you so much. Let me start by saying that comprehensive sexuality education, it's a question about human rights. It's a fundamental right to have information about your own body and your own sexuality. It's a right for every child, every adolescent girl or boy around the globe to be equipped with knowledge, skills, attitudes, and values to enable him or her to make those decisions. What do I want to do with my body? Who do I want to have sex with? Do I want to get married or not? Etc., etc. Because we know that knowledge is power. Do we want people to have the power and the freedom to make those decisions? They need knowledge. But it's also important to see that comprehensive sexuality education is an important tool to reach many of the other development goals. We can see today, if we look at the sustainable development goals, that comprehensive sexuality education is an important tool to reach, for example, goal 3, 4, and 5, the goals on health, education, and gender equality. So for me, it's important to see that in this world where comprehensive sexuality education is one of the most controversial issues to work with, to be honest, that's the fact. But we can at the same time see that all governments on this planet have actually committed to comprehensive sexuality education. All governments on this planet has made a promise to their children and to their youth that you have the right to have talks and information about your body and your sexuality. So the work we have in front of us is holding all governments accountable, ensuring that they leave no one behind when it comes to sexuality education.
Lena, you would like to add?
Yeah, I can add to what Hans is saying about well, Hans outlines very well what is sexual education on sexuality about. But why is it so important? What are we actually seeing out there? So I will give you a couple of figures. For instance, pregnancy and childbirth in countries where we work, in Southern Africa, are the second cause of death among 15 to 19 years old adolescents. So, and that is really horrible figures. And also, 2 out of 3 girls, they have no idea what's happening to their body when they begin to menstruate. And we have also figures from UNESCO that tells us that only 34% of young people globally, they have knowledge about HIV prevention and transmission. So how can they protect themselves if they don't know about it? So the main reason that we need to work on this is the lack of correct information, and that there are so many misconceptions going around. So we really need to secure that there is reliable information available for all these girls and boys. So we think that we can work with comprehensive sexuality education and kind of empowering children and young people so that they can take themselves informed decision about their health, so that they can then live a much richer and more enjoyable lives.
But as you say, it's the lack of information that is prevalent and
Exactly,
widespread
yeah.
in most of these countries. Is that also the situation in Tanzania, Axel?
When it comes to Tanzania on comprehensive sexuality education, I think it's a little bit complicated. We can see from the government level to the church level and to the family level. When it comes to the government, it is not allowed to teach comprehensive sexuality education in school. It is not allowed to include it in curriculums. And students, to some point, they are being taught the reproduction subject. They are being taught a little bit about condoms, about contraceptives. But after that, what follows is a lot of threat, like, we see you with a condom, you are expelled out of school. We see you with contraceptives, you are expelled out of school. You get pregnant in school, you are expelled out of school, and you are no longer allowed to come back to school. You are no longer allowed to access education in Tanzania after getting pregnant or giving birth. And you abort, you go to jail. So, and your parents get arrested too in Tanzania. So it's like the government is putting more stress on punishment than giving right education to these students. So they will be taught like, okay, condoms prevent pregnancy, but they will never teach you how to use condoms because they think like, we teach the student how to use condoms, they will go use them. And then comes the church. They say, this is against our values. We can't teach this. But yet, the church in their congregations are witnessing girls who are suffering from fistula, like giving birth before their bodies are mature. In their congregations, they conduct masses to bury young people who are dying with HIV. In the church, they are doing diaconia to families with 12 children and they can't take care of them, and so the church have to help. So it's like the church is putting wood glasses that we don't want to see with like what is happening, but we will deal with consequences. So the church doesn't want to prevent how things are happening, but it's welcoming the consequences to deal with. And when it comes to family level in Tanzania, all what you are being taught is that you are a girl, you are growing up. All you have to know is that number one enemy in your life is a man, so stay away from a man as much as you can. So in Tanzania, there is nothing like, he is my friend and there is nothing between us. There will always be something between you two. So that's the only thing you are being taught. Like, so some girls grow up thinking like, if I shake with a man, I'll get pregnant. And that's how I grew up too. So they have to find some kind of education outside other people. They teach themselves, and you find that they are teaching themselves something which is not relevant. So this is the situation of comprehensive sexuality education in Tanzania.
You can confirm the statistics presented by Lena, saying that 2 out of 3 girls reported having no idea of what was happening to them when they began menstruating. That is also the situation for most girls in Tanzania. Can you just tell me a little bit about the situation again in Tanzania? Young girls becoming pregnant, being sort of thrown off from schools. That is a relatively recent phenomenon as well. I mean, because of the harsh political climate.
You know now that democracy is too much shrinking in Tanzania, and we are no longer kind of being ruled by written constitution, but decrees. So every day new laws are being imposed. So last year, the president came out with the decree that if a girl gets pregnant in school, they have to be expelled out and you will never come back to public schools, like whether you like it or not. And most of the time, the affected ones are the poor people, because the rich one can somehow find a way to go back to private schools. But the poor people who are the mass cannot access this education anymore. And we don't think there is a correlation between getting pregnant and the punishment of not having education forever. These are two things which are different.
What is actually the argument behind that? Why have they proposed that measure from the government? I mean,
They say it's against our values. It's against
the values.
Yes, it's
To fall
against our
pregnant.
tradition. Yeah, but it's happening anyway. So instead of saying it's against our traditions, we'll deal with consequences. Why can't we deal with the situation before things happen? Yeah.
We will come back, of course, also there are change agents within the church that are trying to correct this situation as well. But first, Hans, in terms of the taboos and some of the conservative trends that are also growing stronger in the world, can you tell us a little bit more about that? What is happening, as you see, at the global and regional arena?
Well, first of all, I think we as Swedes, living in a country where sexuality education has been mandatory in our schools since 1955, it's sometimes difficult to understand and that this is a controversial issue. But that's actually the fact in so many countries and around the globe. I would say that for many of the same organizations that today mobilize against the right to women's bodies, the right for women to their bodies, against the right to abortion, they also today mobilize against the right to comprehensive sexuality education. It's more or less the same kind of resistance. It goes hand in hand. And the purpose, of course, is to control the bodies of women and girls. We can see two different trends, I would say, at the same time. We see an opposition that's mobilizing. We see it within the UN system. I was earlier this spring at CSW, the Conference of the Status of Women, where it was very obvious that the opposition was mobilizing. They were at every single seminar that mentioned sexuality education and asked the same kind of questions. They said, I don't want my son to masturbate. Why do you want your teachers to force my son into masturbation? Those kind of ridiculous questions you got in seminar after seminar. But we also see it in a number of countries where they use arguments about culture, religion, sovereignty as arguments against sexuality education. At the same time, we see another trend. We have seen within the UN system how UNESCO have passed new technical guidelines together with organizations like UNFPA, UN Women, the World Health Organization, that are actually really progressive. Technical guidelines to support member states all around the globe, how they can work with sexuality education. So I think we see two different trends at the same time. The opposition, they are mobilizing, but to be honest, so are we.
The trends and the counter-trends, always.
Yeah.
If we go from the global level to the regional and national level, Lena, you can share information about what's happening in Eastern Africa and Southern Africa.
It's very interesting to listen to Hans about there are positive trends, but there are also things that would actually work against this. And I would kind of reiterate the same thing, but on the regional level, because there are very, good guidelines and there are policy frameworks on the regional level in Africa. For example, Eastern and Southern Africa, ESA, there are strong commitments that you should work with sexuality education. And there are also set very high targets so that, for instance, in 2020, 90% of the teachers should be trained on sexuality education, and also they should be it should be integrated into the curriculum of schools. So on the regional level, there are frameworks and there are guidelines that are agreed among the countries. But then we come to the implementation, and that's where the difficulties actually start. And that is what also AXA is telling us, that when you come to the country level, there is lack of will to actually implement these agreements, and there is also no budget for it. So there is resistance on the country level, and that is what we need to work with. And also another problem on the country level is that sensitization among the teachers, so that they feel that they are capable to actually teach comprehensive sexuality education, so that they feel that they have the knowledge, they have the security and the confidence to teach it in a comprehensive way, but also in a non-judgmental way, because it's very much about judging these areas, as we hear here, and also to the right adolescent at the right time, because at a certain age you can kind of be you will be ready to receive this kind of information. You will ask for it. So there are a couple of I would say challenges, but they are mainly on the country level, as AXA is telling us.
And there are these big gaps between the legislative pieces and the actual implementation, also because of the prevalent norms in society.
Yeah.
Aksai, looking back to the situation in Tanzania and this opposition that you face both from government and the state, and also within families and in the church, we know that quite often it's the use of the ABC method that is sort of being promoted. Could you just explain what that means, the ABC method here, and why they promote that?
I think the church, between the ABCs, the church has been focusing more on A.
On A, and what does that stand for?
Which is abstinence. This is all to do with HIV prevention. Like you might use either abstinence, or you remain with one faith partner, or you use condom. When it comes to the church says, we can deal with BCs. We have to deal with A. But as I said before, they see the consequences, that A really doesn't work. All that works probably it's not B, not C. People are just having sex. They don't have right education. And the chaos comes that they are not using either A, they are not using either B, they are not using either C. They don't use condoms because the church prevents condoms. They don't abstain because they think nobody is seeing me. That thing is done in the dark. And they don't have one faith partner. So I think it's not right for the church saying that, because personally I'm working with the church, and they are kind of resisting to use the BC, and they concentrate on A, but it's quite different. I'm asking the bishop, like, you see the situation. You see what's happening every day, even in our own religious schools. Like, it's a girls' school, but every semester we have to chase away girls who are pregnant. And do you think really this is working? Can the church find a way to adapt these methods?
What's his response, the bishop?
His response is that it's okay, it's true, but we need to educate these people more. We need to find a way on how it will not sound provocative, or how it won't be seen like the church is supporting sex. Because when people hear about sexuality education, all they think about is sex. But it has a lot to do with demography, it has a lot to do with development, it has a lot to do with our own health. Yeah.
So now we have identified the gaps between sort of the legislative pieces and what governments are supposed to do and what we expect from churches and religious leaders. But in terms of the actual implementation, what we can do to address this gap, to ensure access to especially for youth then, to comprehensive sexual education, what can we actually do? What do you do as the Lutheran Church in Tanzania? If we start there at the very local level and the different methods that you use in order to get across with your message.
Yeah. So I think on what shall we do, it might be difficult to get the one-size-fits-all, because different people face different obstacles when it comes to comprehensive sexuality education. So here I will talk about what are we doing in our community based on what obstacles we are facing when it comes to comprehensive sexuality education. First of all, the Lutheran Church have decided to take a method where we are teaching religious leaders. Like, first of all, these are influential people. Like, people are mostly influenced by what religion tells them to do. In my community, we are so religious. So, like, we draw our values and everything mostly from religion. So religious leaders have more influence to what people can decide, what can people do. So we are training them. For example, Josephine was talking about our whole lives, where we are training pastors, we are training young people, we are training doctors specific on how to teach sexuality education. At first, they are so uncomfortable with that. But after teaching, they come so comfortable and they think, oh, okay, we can discuss this even with congregants. So we are trying to find ways in which we can we are trying to find good entry points. For example, we also have this menstrual hygiene method where we are like, we want to focus on teaching menstrual hygiene to young girls. That's our entry point. So this year, I went to Kenya to the CAP Summit, where they were talking about menstrual hygiene and how girls can access different ways of using like pads, cups during their menstrual period. But actually, that's an entry point where we will teach the whole reproductive system and all things about our bodies. Yes. So after going there, I came back. They were expecting me to give feedback. They know that I went there to learn about menstruation, and I have to give feedback to the management team. It's all men, old, pastors. I'm the youngest. I'm only 2 women. And they were like, so tell us about the cups. Because they know it's about menstruation. And they think it's like kind of an abomination to speak about this. It touched those parts of the body where you must be shy and you don't have to speak about them. And I looked at them with my cup, and I was like, okay, Aksa, if these men think that they will make you lose your face, then make them lose their faces first before they smash it on you. So I took out my cup, and you know, it's not easy to deal with this cup and to teach it how it is used. So I took it out and I said, hey, Pastor, your wife gets menstruation every month. What does he use? And it was them like searching their faces, and I said, okay, I got you. So I used this cup as a way for them to start discussing menstruation, like without feeling shy. And I showed them like, okay, this cup is being used like this. You have to kneel, you have to put this pose to use this cup. It is economical, and like that, everyone in the room was comfortable again. And I said, why do you see this speaking about menstruation like an abomination? Actually, this part of sexuality is a sacred one, the most holy one. So there is nothing bad to speak about it. So actually what we are doing is, first of all, create an environment where people will feel comfortable talking about this.
Secure.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. But and of course that's very practical about the menstruation cup and using that as an entry point. But I guess you also, as I know that you think it's important that you also read the Bible together in order for them to understand. You talked about holy sexuality. It's a different way of reading the Bible, or the Quran for that matter, in Muslim communities. How do you go about that?
You know, people always, especially in my community, draw everything they say in the Bible. Sometimes they will say, the Bible is against this. But when you say, okay, which citation, I think it has also to do with hermeneutics. How do you interpret these readings? So we go together with the pastors, with the other theologians, pick the Bible and other readings. They are so rich. But only that we don't know, and we don't know how to interpret it, and we differ how we interpret the writings. So we find like everything we say have something relevant within the Bible. So when they find that, okay, yeah, I think the Bible supports this, and then they will say, okay, I think that's true. So it's okay for them to welcome something which you drew the example or your reflection from the Bible. So that's what we are doing, using the Bible to make these reflections about sexuality and all that.
And then sort of the transformation of attitudes and perceptions, it can go quite quickly, as far as I'm understood. Josephine talks about sometimes in 4 days.
Yeah.
These pastors are transformed for the cause. Is that true?
Of course, that's true.
That's true. That's good to know that. Well, Lena, could you add also a perspective in terms of what you are doing at the regional and national level as Save the Children to address these gaps?
Save the Children, we have also identified religious leaders as very important to work with, since they are often very, very influential in the communities, as we have just heard. And and also, as we heard just now, they're also considered being part of the problem. But they can also be kind of, like we heard, changed, and they can be the ones that actually promote and work against all these challenging stigmas and taboos in these countries. And I would like to tell you about one of the partners that Erik already mentioned, that we are also supporting as Save the Children. It's Enerela. That is an interfaith network of religious leaders, and they are actually living by or affected by HIV. And they work actually directly with religious leaders to seek to empower them, so in a transformative way, building up their skills so that they can go out then in their communities and really be agents for change. But it's not easy, and you cannot, like, I'm sure you can tell us even more about it. You cannot just see them as one, because they all come with their own values and experiences, so they are all so different. So we need really to address perhaps one by one, but we need to kind of discuss what this means for being a religious leader. And it's also about, acknowledge that there is a variety of religious leaders and that there are a variety of communities as well. But even within the same faith, we need to see that they are individuals, so we need to work closely. But we think it's working through partners, as we do, and supporting our partners in this work is the most sustainable way to do it, because they will remain there. They will remain there on the regional level, but reaching out then to countries. So that is one. But we have identified, so all our partners working within the field of sexual and reproductive health and rights, as you said earlier, Erik, we have a regional program in Southern Africa. They work in one way or another with traditional and religious leaders. And as I said, it can be really challenging sometimes because sexuality and reproductive health are so kind of controversial issues in the whole society, actually. So you have to enter so many barriers all the time. But we see that there is a change. And another organization that we support, where we can also see that we have concrete results, is one partner in Zanzibar called Safa. And they work with the local imams on the islands on Zanzibar to actually sensitize them around sexuality and sexuality education. And they have actually managed to, with this program, they have been sensitized, and they now have included sexual education into the curriculum of these madrasas, the religious schools. So I see this as one. There are also kind of steps that's also perhaps it's in part of Tanzania. So there are also positive things happening in Tanzania as we see it. But then it's so that is an achievement to bring that into the curriculum on Zanzibar. But at the same time, we need to work with other stakeholders as well. So we need also to work with the parents, because parents are also important in actually acknowledging that their boys and girls actually have the right to their own bodies, to sexuality, and also the community. So reach out broader, including health workers. So this needs to be a very, very engaged and long-term and really hard work.
Hard work, yeah.
Yeah, hard work.
Absolutely.
So yeah, that is
but it's also
what we are doing.
the multi-faith dimension that you have included in your work in the regional program, and this secular faith-based collaboration in this area, which is also incredibly important.
Yeah, we are a secular organization, but we identified religious leaders as being key stakeholders in this work. So we support this regional organization, but we also need to combine this with advocacy work. For instance, we support organizations that advocate for safe abortions. We need to see a policy change here. We hear from different countries. That varies over the countries in Africa. But we see that there is a right to safe abortion, and we need to advocate for it together with partners.
Also at the global level, we see some very interesting trends in terms of secular faith-based cooperation, Hans. Could you tell us more about that? What is happening in Latin America, for instance, regional and global level?
Exactly, because I think for us in RFSU, it's been really important to work on all levels. We work on the national level in a number of countries where we support partners in their work, both to deliver sexuality education and make advocacy for sexuality education. We will also work on the regional level and within the UN system. In Latin America, for example, we have worked for a long time with organizations called Católicas por el Derecho a Decidir, Catholics for Choice. They are Catholics and feminists working for the right to choose, right to abortion, the right to comprehensive sexuality education, the right to modern contraceptives. And we can see that they have been so instrumental in a number of Latin American countries. To be honest, if we want to reach out to a conservative Catholic senator in Bolivia, I am probably the last person you should send to make that advocacy. But through supporting activists that are Catholics in Bolivia, they can reach out. They can really influence and make a difference. That's such an example how we can work with local religious actors, faith-based organizations to actually make a difference. Another example how we have worked within the UN system is that we see that the UN is becoming more, the United Nations is becoming more and more polarized over the issue on comprehensive sexuality education. But we also see a number of swing states in the middle, where you have countries that haven't really a clear or strong position on comprehensive sexuality education. Countries like Botswana or Tunisia or Albania. And we've thought a lot about how can we influence these countries? How can we influence their UN ambassadors? Once again, I'm probably the last person you should use, a man coming from a secular organization in Sweden. But then we have facilitated a number of meetings with these UN ambassadors from these countries so they can meet with our partners in countries like Ghana, for example. So we have activists coming from Ghana, coming to, for example, Geneva, to the Council of Human Rights, to tell about their work in the rural areas of Ghana. And we have seen how they've been able to influence these UN ambassadors. At the end of the day, when they've been, a vote, we have seen that a number of these ambassadors have voted in favor of comprehensive sexuality education. So we see that it is possible, and it's possible to make a difference both on the local level, but also actually within the UN system.
You're actually touching about the recommendations that we could give to governments and civil society and donors, how to work with these issues. You mentioned sort of these different nations here. If I ask you, Aksa, to start with you, in terms of recommendations that you would like to give from your perspective, from being active on these issues in the Tanzanian context.
I think, first of all, comprehensive sexuality education should be recognized as a right. And all young people should know that getting access to comprehensive sexuality education is my right. That's when they can fight for it. That's when they can demand for it. Otherwise, they will never know that we have a right to this and we want our right. And second, I think church leaders or religious leaders should be included. Like, they have a great role to play, and they have a central role to play in people's lives, and they have influence. So it's really important that faith-based institutions are included in giving education, comprehensive sexuality education. So they should be empowered on this. But also to insist on political will of governments. This means comprehensive sexuality education is something big. That's why some countries are just standing up to oppose, saying that we don't want this kind of education. So they should push for political will among countries to accept sexuality education in their curriculums.
You mentioned about the church leaders should be included. Is it possible for you as the Evangelical Lutheran Church to scale up your programs? Are you able to reach all the dioceses and congregations around the country? Or how does it look like you in terms of financial support, but also other means of support for that work?
What we are doing now, especially with our project of adolescent girls empowerment, we can reach only 2 government districts.
Okay.
But the need is so big, We are being invited by nearby districts, by many people saying that we wish we could have something like you. And some of the district and secondary schools, they are trying to adapt it. Like, we want to do something like what you are doing, but we don't know how we can do it. So they are relying on us, inviting us to speak, inviting us to do, because a lot of people, according to shrinking spaces, they are scared to speak, especially something which the government says, no, you can't do this. So it's almost like the Lutheran Church only, which is standing up to give this education. So if we could get like more support and expand, that could solve the problem, at least for much in Tanzania.
What's your own personal situation? I mean, it's like still a controversial issue, very much so for you as well, in terms of reaching out to these districts. Sometimes I guess you feel that you also live in fear because of what could happen to you and to your colleagues.
As a coordinator of the project, sometimes you have to take personal risks because I'm a coordinator. I have to stand up and speak. And at the end, I pay a price as an individual, not like a coordinator, not my position, not my church. So when President Magufuli said, no teenagers should go back to school after giving birth, I said, okay, well, we are like empowering young girls in schools. We are encouraging that young girls should access education. I can't keep quiet. And I said, okay, what will my church say? Will they say that I'm supporting sex before marriage? I'm supporting sex in schools? I said, okay, I don't need to consult anyone because I think this is the right thing. So I went into a public radio and I conducted a debate and I said, no, this statement cannot be wrong. The very first person to call me was the owner of the radio and he said, please, I don't want my radio to be shut down. I want it to continue working. And I was like, okay, you are done. What will the bishop say for what you have said? What will the general secretary say? And then I said, but no, Aksa, this is right. This is what you have to say. But I was doing that as a person and as a coordinator of the project, but I have to pay like personal consequences. Like people are scared, like the government will follow you. They will say you are against the government. Our member of parliament has been a little bit against me, coming to the bishop, saying I should be fired because I'm entering into politics. And I said, politics is our life. Politics touches us. Like the bishop is wearing all his clothes, but they are being bought by money. This was politics also involved when he was buying your collar. So you can say that the church should not intervene into political issues. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Hans, quite often you refer to the importance of not working in silos, I mean, in terms of addressing these gaps.
Definitely.
Perhaps you can elaborate in terms of recommendations, how to go about it.
Well, first of all, I totally agree with all the recommendations from Aksa. So let's make it quite
me too.
Let's make it quite easy for me. If I can add one thing, I would say that we know that this is a fundamental right for every child on this planet to have comprehensive sexuality education. But if you look today at the world, who are we leaving behind? I would say one of the groups we are really leaving behind today are the 28 million children that are right now refugees. Because we see that when it comes to humanitarian assistance, we believe that it's only tents and water and sanitation they need. But these children also need comprehensive sexuality education. The children right now living in the refugee camps in Jordan, or the Rohingya refugee children coming over to Bangladesh, they also need to have knowledge about their body and their sexuality education. So if I could add one more recommendation to the excellent list from Aksa, I would say to include comprehensive sexuality education into the humanitarian work.
Very important. Final word from
Lena.
Lena.
So what is there left then to add?
You are left.
No, I think it's quite striking what Astra is telling us about how the lack of access to comprehensive sexuality education is actually affecting the most marginalized and the poorest children. And that is so obvious in Tanzania. They have no other option but a public school. And if it's not included into the curriculum, and if teachers are not equipped and able to actually teach this, and that it is also that you have the adequate resources to do it, we will still face the same problem. So I think because it's about the poorest children in the world, it's really about integrating it into the curriculum of the public schools.
Well, friends, time is up. It's time to conclude, but still perhaps one final word from AXA to the audience before we stop this session together.
I think I have talked a lot.
You should, and we listen attentively.
Well, as I have been saying, sexuality education is about who we are. It's about the whole process of how we came to Earth. It's something sacred, something holy. So we should embrace it with love. We should talk about it while we are smiling. We should learn about all the dangers that can come with sexuality. Sexuality is all about identity to some of the people. We are not all female and male. There are some people who are in between, and all of them are struggling with their sexuality. So sexuality is very wide. Sexuality education is not all about having a safe intercourse. It's so way more than that. That's all I can add.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And for those of you that are interested in continuing this conversation with AXA and Hans and Lena, we know you can go to the lady there, Samtal fortsätter. And Gunilla, you will also be available. Yes. So please do that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you to AXA, Hans and Lena.
Thank you.